Imagine being torn from everything you know and love as a teenager. Your homeland conquered, your future uncertain, your faith tested in ways you never imagined possible. Now picture standing before the most powerful ruler on earth, knowing that your next words could mean life or death. This is not the plot of a modern thriller. This is the true story of a young man named Daniel, whose unwavering faith would shake ancient empires and change the course of history forever. What would you do if staying true to your beliefs meant facing a den of hungry lions? How would you respond if honoring your God could cost you everything? Today, we're diving deep into one of history's most incredible stories of courage, wisdom, and divine protection. Get comfortable, because you're about to discover how one man's faith became a beacon of hope that still shines brightly after thousands of years. Our story begins in the ancient kingdom of Judah, during the third year of King Jehoiakim's reign. The year was approximately 605 BC, and storm clouds were gathering over the holy city of Jerusalem. From the mighty empire of Babylon came Nebuchadnezzar, a king whose name struck fear into the hearts of nations. His armies were vast, his siege weapons formidable, and his ambition knew no bounds. When Nebuchadnezzar's forces surrounded Jerusalem, it wasn't just another military conquest, it was the fulfillment of ancient prophecies. The city that had stood as God's chosen dwelling place was about to fall, not because God was powerless, but because his people had turned away from him. Sometimes, the most difficult truth to accept is that even in judgment, God's purposes are being fulfilled. The siege was swift and decisive. King Jehoiakim found himself powerless before the Babylonian war machine. But Nebuchadnezzar wasn't interested only in political victory, he wanted cultural domination. He understood that to truly conquer a people, you must capture their minds, their talents, and their future leaders. So along with the treasures from God's holy temple, he took something far more precious, the brightest young minds of Judah. Among the captives were young men from royal and noble families. These weren't ordinary prisoners of war. They were carefully selected for their potential, their intelligence, and their promise. The criteria were specific. They had to be without physical blemish, handsome in appearance, skilled in wisdom, endowed with knowledge and understanding, and competent enough to serve in the king's palace. Picture these young men, probably in their mid-teens, being marched hundreds of miles from everything they had ever known. Their families, their customs, their temple, their God, all left behind. Yet among this group of displaced youth were four friends whose names would echo through eternity: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. When these young captives arrived in Babylon, they entered a world designed to transform them completely. The king had appointed Ashpenaz, his chief eunuch, to oversee their education. This wasn't just academic training, it was cultural reprogramming. They were to learn the literature and language of the Chaldeans, the sophisticated arts of Babylonian wisdom and magic. Everything about their new life was calculated to make them forget who they were and where they came from. They were given new names that honored Babylonian gods instead of the God of Israel. Daniel became Belteshazzar, honoring the Babylonian god Bel. Hananiah became Shadrach, Mishael became Meshach, and Azariah became Abednego. Even their identities were being systematically erased. But perhaps the most challenging aspect of their new life was the food. The king assigned them a daily portion of the royal diet, the finest foods and wines from his own table. To most people, this would seem like an incredible privilege. Here were these young captives being treated better than many free citizens of Babylon. However, Daniel understood something that his captors didn't expect. This wasn't just about food, it was about identity, faith, and loyalty to God. The royal food was likely offered to idols before being served. The preparation methods probably violated the dietary laws that God had given to his people. To eat this food would be to participate in idol worship and abandon the very foundations of his faith. This was Daniel's first major test in a foreign land, and the decision he made would set the tone for his entire life. He could have reasoned it away. He could have said that God would understand, that survival was more important than dietary laws, that he was just a teenager in an impossible situation. Instead, Daniel resolved in his heart that he would not defile himself with the king's food or wine. But notice how Daniel handled this crisis. He didn't rebel openly or create a scene that would have endangered everyone. Instead, he approached the chief eunuch with wisdom and respect. He proposed a simple test. Please test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the king's food, and deal with your servants according to what you see. The official was understandably nervous. If these young men appeared weak or sickly, it would be his head on the chopping block. But something about Daniel's respectful confidence convinced him to take the risk. For 10 days, Daniel and his friends ate simple vegetables and drank water while their peers enjoyed the royal delicacies. The results were remarkable. At the end of 10 days, Daniel and his friends appeared healthier and better nourished than all the young men who had been eating the king's food. This wasn't just about good nutrition, it was about God's blessing on those who choose to honor Him even in difficult circumstances. As the months turned into years, something extraordinary happened to these 4 young men who had chosen faithfulness over convenience. God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom. They excelled in their studies, mastering the complex arts and sciences of Babylon while never compromising their core beliefs. But Daniel received an additional gift that would prove crucial in the years to come. He had understanding in all visions and dreams. This wasn't just academic knowledge or natural intelligence. This was supernatural insight, a divine ability to understand the hidden meanings behind dreams and visions. When their 3-year training period was complete, all the young men were brought before King Nebuchadnezzar for their final examination. The king spoke with each of them personally, testing their knowledge and abilities. But among all of them, none was found to compare with Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The text tells us that in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his entire kingdom. These 4 teenagers, who had been willing to risk everything for their faith, had become the most valuable advisors in the most powerful empire on earth. But success in Babylon was as dangerous as it was rewarding. In the 2nd year of his reign, something happened that would test Daniel's faith and abilities like never before. Nebuchadnezzar began having dreams that troubled his spirit so deeply that he couldn't sleep. These weren't ordinary dreams that fade with morning light. They were vivid, disturbing, and filled with meaning that the king couldn't understand. Desperate for answers, he summoned all his wise men, the magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and Chaldeans. Surely among all these learned men, someone could help him understand what his dreams meant. But when the wise men assembled before the king, Nebuchadnezzar made a demand that left them speechless with terror. He didn't just want them to interpret his dream, he wanted them to tell him what he had dreamed in the first place. If they were truly wise and connected to the gods, he reasoned, they should be able to know the dream as well as its meaning. The wise men pleaded with the king, "Tell your servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation." This was how things were normally done. The dreamer would describe their dream, and the wise men would offer various interpretations based on their training and experience. But Nebuchadnezzar was not in a reasonable mood. His response was terrifying. "The word from me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you shall be torn limb from limb, and your houses shall be made a dunghill. But if you show the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor." The wise men tried one more time to reason with the king, but his fury only intensified. "I know with certainty that you are trying to gain time, because you see that my word is gone from me. If you do not tell me the dream, there is but one decree for you. You have prepared lying and corrupt words to speak before me, till the time be changed. Therefore tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can show me its interpretation." In desperation, one of the wise men spoke what everyone was thinking, "There is not a man on earth who can show the king's matter. No king, however great and mighty, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or Chaldean. What the king asks is difficult, and no one can show it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh." This answer sent Nebuchadnezzar into a rage that would have consequences far beyond the palace walls. He issued a decree that all the wise men of Babylon should be destroyed. Every single one of them, including Daniel and his 3 friends who hadn't even been present at this meeting. When Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, came to arrest Daniel and his companions, he found something he didn't expect. Instead of panic or desperate pleading, Daniel responded with prudence and discretion. He asked calmly, "Why is the decree from the king so urgent?" When Arioch explained the situation, Daniel did something that must have seemed either incredibly brave or completely foolish. He went directly to the king and requested time to provide both the dream and its interpretation. Remember, this was the same king who had just condemned all the wise men to death for failing to do exactly what Daniel was promising to accomplish. But Daniel had something the other wise men didn't have: faith in a God who reveals deep and hidden things. He went to his house and immediately shared the situation with Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Together, they did the only thing they could do: they prayed. This wasn't casual prayer or wishful thinking. They sought mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, knowing that their lives and the lives of all the wise men in Babylon hung in the balance. They understood that only God could reveal what the king had dreamed and what it meant. That night, as Daniel slept, God revealed the mystery to him in a vision. Can you imagine the relief, the awe, the overwhelming gratitude he must have felt? But before rushing to the palace, Daniel did something that reveals the true character of his heart. He praised God. "Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, to whom belong wisdom and might. He changes times and seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. To you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we asked of you, for you have made known to us the king's matter." The next morning, Daniel was brought before the furious king. Nebuchadnezzar's first question cut straight to the heart of the matter. "Are you able to make known to me the dream that I have seen and its interpretation?" Daniel's response was masterful in its humility and boldness. He didn't claim credit for supernatural abilities or try to impress the king with his wisdom. Instead, he said, "No wise man, enchanter, magician, or astrologer can show to the king the mystery that the king has asked, but there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days." Then Daniel proceeded to describe the king's dream with perfect accuracy. Nebuchadnezzar had seen a great statue, magnificent and terrifying in its appearance. The head was made of fine gold, the chest and arms of silver, the belly and thighs of bronze, the legs of iron, and the feet partly of iron and partly of clay. But that wasn't all. In the dream, a stone cut without hands struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay, completely destroying it. The iron, clay, bronze, silver, and gold were all broken in pieces and became like chaff that the wind carried away until no trace of them could be found. But the stone that destroyed the statue became a great mountain that filled the whole earth. The king must have been amazed to hear his exact dream described so perfectly. But Daniel wasn't finished. Now came the interpretation that would prove to be one of the most accurate prophecies in all of human history. The great statue represented a succession of world empires. Nebuchadnezzar himself was the head of gold, the Babylonian Empire at its height of power and glory. After him would come another kingdom inferior to his, represented by the silver chest and arms. This would be the Medo-Persian Empire that would eventually conquer Babylon. The bronze belly and thighs represented a third kingdom that would rule over all the earth, the Greek Empire under Alexander the Great. The iron legs symbolized a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, that would break and crush everything before it, the Roman Empire. The feet of iron mixed with clay represented the divided nature of the kingdoms that would emerge from Rome, partly strong and partly fragile, never fully united. But the most significant part of the interpretation concerned the stone cut without hands. This represented a kingdom that the God of heaven would establish that would never be destroyed, never conquered, never passed to another people. It would break in pieces all these earthly kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it would stand forever. When Nebuchadnezzar heard this interpretation, something remarkable happened. The most powerful man on earth fell on his face before Daniel and declared, "Truly, your God is God of gods and Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this mystery." The king loaded Daniel with honors, gifts, and high position. He made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief prefect over all the wise men. At Daniel's request, the king also appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to administrative positions in the province. But human nature is tragically predictable. Nebuchadnezzar's humility before God was short-lived. Pride began to swell in his heart, and he forgot the lessons he had learned about God's sovereignty. In an act of spectacular arrogance, he decided to build a golden statue 90 feet high and set it up on the plain of Dura. This wasn't just art or architecture, it was a direct challenge to God's revelation. Remember, in the dream, Nebuchadnezzar was only the head of gold. By making an entire statue of gold, he was essentially declaring that his kingdom would last forever, directly contradicting God's prophecy. The king commanded that when the music played, everyone in the empire must fall down and worship his golden image. Anyone who refused would be immediately thrown into a burning fiery furnace. This was the ultimate test of loyalty, not just to the king, but to his gods and his empire. For most people in the empire, this presented no real problem. They were already accustomed to worshiping multiple gods, and adding one more to their collection was no big deal. But for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, this command was impossible to obey. They could serve the king in civil matters, but worship belonged to God alone. Years passed, and Nebuchadnezzar continued to learn hard lessons about the sovereignty of God. Despite repeated demonstrations of God's power, the king's pride continued to be his weakness. Eventually, God humbled him in a way that shocked the ancient world. He was driven from his throne and lived like an animal in the fields until he acknowledged that the Most High rules the kingdom of mankind. When Nebuchadnezzar's sanity and kingdom were restored, he wrote a public testimony acknowledging God's eternal dominion. But empires rise and fall according to God's perfect timing, just as Daniel had prophesied. The great Babylonian Empire continued, but its days were numbered. During this time, Daniel continued to serve faithfully and received incredible visions from God. In the first year of Belshazzar's reign, he saw 4 great beasts rising from the sea, representing the same kingdoms he had interpreted in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, but from God's perspective rather than man's. Daniel saw a lion with eagle's wings representing Babylon, a ravenous bear representing the Medo-Persian Empire, a leopard with 4 wings and 4 heads representing Greece and its division after Alexander's death, and a 4th beast more terrifying than all the others, representing Rome and the powers that would arise from it. But more importantly, Daniel saw beyond the turmoil of earthly empires to the ultimate victory of God's kingdom. He witnessed the Ancient of Days taking his throne, judgment being passed, and one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven to receive an everlasting dominion that would never pass away. Decades later, Nebuchadnezzar's grandson Belshazzar ruled in Babylon. But unlike his grandfather, Belshazzar had learned nothing from history. In an act of supreme arrogance, he held a great feast where he deliberately used the sacred vessels taken from God's temple in Jerusalem to drink wine and praise idols of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. This was more than mere disrespect. It was a calculated insult to the God of heaven. The vessels had been consecrated for worship in God's temple, and using them to honor false gods was an act of deliberate blasphemy. God's response was immediate and terrifying. The fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster wall of the palace. The king watched in horror as the hand wrote mysterious words that no one could understand. His face went pale, his thoughts terrified him, and his knees knocked together. Despite offering great rewards, none of his wise men could read the writing or interpret its meaning. Then the queen mother remembered Daniel, the man who had solved impossible mysteries for Nebuchadnezzar, who had the spirit of the holy gods and extraordinary wisdom. Daniel, now an elderly man, was brought before the terrified king. Belshazzar offered him rich rewards if he could read the writing and explain its meaning. But Daniel's response showed that the years hadn't dimmed his courage or compromised his integrity. Let your gifts be for yourself, and give your rewards to another. Nevertheless, I will read the writing to the king and make known to him the interpretation. Before revealing the meaning of the mysterious writing, Daniel gave Belshazzar a history lesson he desperately needed to hear. He reminded the king how God had given Nebuchadnezzar great power, but when pride filled his heart, God brought him low until he acknowledged that the Most High rules over human kingdoms. But you, his son Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, though you knew all this. You have lifted yourself up against the Lord of heaven. The vessels of his house have been brought in before you, and you and your lords, your wives, and your concubines have drunk wine from them. You have praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which do not see or hear or know, but the God in whose hand is your breath, and whose are all your ways, you have not honored. Then Daniel read the writing, tekel, parson. These weren't just random words, they were a divine pronouncement of judgment. God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Peres, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. That very night, while the feast continued and the king tried to forget the ominous message, Persian forces breached Babylon's defenses. Belshazzar was killed, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom. The golden head of Nebuchadnezzar's statue had fallen, just as God had prophesied decades earlier. Under Medo-Persian rule, Daniel's wisdom and integrity continued to shine. King Darius appointed 120 satraps to govern the kingdom, with 3 high officials over them, and Daniel was one of the 3. In fact, Daniel so distinguished himself that the king planned to set him over the entire kingdom. But success bred jealousy, just as it had in Babylon. The other officials desperately searched for some ground to bring charges against Daniel, but they found none. He was faithful, trustworthy, and no error or fault could be found in him. Finally, they realized the truth. We shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God. So they devised a cunning plan. They persuaded King Darius to establish an ordinance that for 30 days, anyone who made a petition to any god or man except the king would be cast into a den of lions. The law, once signed, would be irrevocable according to the law of the Medes and Persians. Flattered by what seemed like a demonstration of ultimate loyalty, Darius signed the document. He had no idea he was being manipulated into a trap designed to destroy his most valuable administrator. When Daniel learned that the document had been signed, he faced the ultimate test of his faith. He was probably in his 80s by now, having served faithfully through the reigns of multiple kings. He could have rationalized that God would understand if he prayed privately for 30 days, or modified his routine to avoid detection. Instead, Daniel went to his house, opened his windows toward Jerusalem, and got down on his knees 3 times a day to pray and give thanks before his God, just as he had always done. He would not compromise his faithfulness, even under threat of death. The conspirators were watching and waiting. They rushed to King Darius with their accusation, reminding him of the law and reporting Daniel's violation. Only then did the king realize he had been tricked. He was greatly distressed and worked until sunset trying to find a way to save Daniel, but the law was irrevocable. With a heavy heart, Darius gave the order. Daniel was brought to the lion's den, and the king spoke to him with sorrowful hope. "May your God, whom you serve continually, deliver you." A stone was placed over the mouth of the den and sealed with the royal signet. Daniel was left alone in the darkness with the lions, while the king returned to his palace for the most sleepless night of his life. At the first light of dawn, King Darius hurried to the lion's den. As he approached, he called out in anguish, "O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions?" Then came a voice from the den, calm, clear, and very much alive. "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, because I was found blameless before him, and also before you, O king, I have done no harm." The king was overjoyed. Daniel was lifted out of the den without a scratch, because he had trusted in his God. But the story wasn't over. Those who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought with their families and cast into the same den. Before they even reached the bottom, the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces. The same lions that had been gentle as lambs with Daniel became instruments of swift justice for his accusers. God's protection was not just miraculous, it was precisely targeted. King Darius wrote a decree to all peoples, nations, and languages throughout his empire, I make a decree that in all my royal dominion people are to tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall be to the end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, he who has saved Daniel from the power of the lions. Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and continued to serve during the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Throughout his long life, from his teenage years in Babylon to his final breath, he remained steadfast in his faith. He faced kings and lions, decoded mysteries, and received prophecies, always pointing not to himself but to the power and sovereignty of the one true God. Daniel's story is more than ancient history, it's a timeless testimony to the power of unwavering faith. In a world that constantly pressures us to compromise our beliefs, Daniel's example shows us that it's possible to remain faithful without being fanatical, to be respectful without being spineless, and to trust God completely regardless of the consequences. From his youthful resolve to eat only vegetables rather than defile himself, to his calm faith as an old man facing hungry lions, Daniel demonstrated that those who honor God will find that God honors them. His protection is real, his wisdom prevails, and his kingdom endures forever. As we close this incredible journey through Daniel's life, we're left with profound questions that reach across the centuries to touch our own lives. What would you be willing to risk for your faith? When the pressure is on and everyone around you is compromising, would you have the courage to stand alone? Daniel's story reminds us that God is still in control, even when everything seems to be falling apart. Empires rise and fall, but God's kingdom stands forever. His people may face trials and testing, but they are never abandoned or forgotten. If this story has encouraged you, inspired you, or challenged you to think more deeply about faith and courage, I'd love to hear from you. Please take a moment to like this video if it blessed you. It really helps others discover these timeless truths. Subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories from Scripture that will strengthen your faith and expand your understanding of God's amazing plan throughout history. And please, leave a comment below. Share your thoughts about Daniel's courage. Tell us about a time when you had to stand up for your faith, or ask any questions this story has raised in your heart. Your engagement means the world to us and helps build a community of believers who encourage one another in faith. Remember, the same God who shut the mouths of lions for Daniel is still protecting and providing for his people today. His love never fails, his promises never break, and his kingdom will never end. Until next time, may you find the courage to live with Daniel-like faith in a world that desperately needs to see the reality of God's power and love. God bless you all, and we'll see you in the next video.